What's up, guys? Neil Orfield here, setting up my fantasy cruncher for the FanDuel single game slate for the first Thursday night football slate of the year. Buffalo Bills at Los Angeles Rams tonight. Should be a high scoring affair, should be a fun one. And I'm just going to show you how I'm going to set up my fantasy cruncher for this slate. And it's, pretty much the same for almost every slate. It changes slightly here and there based on the different conditions of the slate. But I will start right away. And the first place that I go is into the advanced options in Fantasy Cruncher. And I set up the general tab first. For me, I'm playing 150 lineups. I'm leaving this unique players per lineup at one. If you're only playing 20 lineups or fewer, I would suggest probably moving that up to two. But if you're playing 150 lineups, it's kind of up to your discretion. For me, I'm going to leave that at one. I don't really know how many lineups of mine are going to be one-offs anyway, but with the small player pool, I think I'm just going to leave that at one for now. The next place I go is looking at team salary. And here, I do like to set a max salary here. And the reason I do that is just because I want to have unique lineups, not necessarily 100% unique, but I want them to be duplicated as few times as possible. And one easy way to find lineups that are less duplicated is to leave some salary on the table. On FanDuel, we're working with salary increments of $500. So it doesn't make any sense to leave this at like 59,600. You're probably going to want to set it lower than that. Actually, no, you would still, you could get some players that you could send at 59,500 if you do that. But I usually set it a little bit lower than that because I want to have as few duplicates as possible. You just need to keep in mind that as you get to lower salaries, you're also decreasing your probability of winning if you assume that salaries are efficient here, which typically they should be fairly efficient. So it's a trade-off. You're going to find lineups that are duplicated fewer times. If you leave more salary on the table, you're also slightly decreasing your probability of winning. And the more you leave on, sometimes greatly reducing your probability of winning. If you leave 10,000 on the table, it's pretty unlikely that you're going to win on a slate like tonight with these high-powered offenses. So I probably wouldn't go quite that far, but I'd leave, at least leave that 500 on the table just so that you are not going to be duplicated 500 times and potentially lose money despite having the winning lineup if you 150 max. I'm not going to tell you exactly how much I leave here just because the goal here is to avoid duplicates. And if we're all putting the same number here, we're going to go right back to that same problem. We might duplicate each other. So use your discretion there. All right. In the offensive players versus defense field, this was not a consideration last year. This year we have defenses on FanDuel, if I remember correctly. So this actually matters this year. And I'm going to set it at the max of 4 players against my defense on FanDuel. Just an easy way to get unique. A lot of hand builders are not going to want to play a defense against their offensive players. So it's an easy way to get unique. Maybe there's a little bit of negative correlation with Matthew Stafford and the Bills defense, for example. But I think that the benefits outweigh the negatives here. If nobody's going to be playing those lineups and it's a way to get unique. Matthew Stafford, for example, throws a pick six. Sure, that hurts Stafford. He gets negative points for the interception. But the Bills defense gets a lot of points. And guess what? Matthew Stafford just gets the ball right back. Now they're in a better game script for passing potentially. So I like to include the maximum number of offensive players against my defense. Moving down. Okay. Player exposure caps. I leave this at 100%. I'm okay with getting whatever Fantasy Cruncher gives me. I will go in and adjust here and there with projections sometimes to get less of players. And one thing I also do is I set it at 100% for all players. And then I will go in and at the, it's not called captain on FanDuel, at the crown spot, whatever it's called on FanDuel, the MVP spot, I will go in and I will adjust that lower because I want to set my cap for the MVP spot on FanDuel. But for here in the global exposure settings, I'm leaving it at 100%. Randomness, totally up to you what you want to use here. I'm probably going to set mine around 50%. NFL is pretty wild, so you can set it, fairly high. You could go higher than this if you wanted to. The lower you set your randomness, the more control you have over your lineups. So I might actually be reducing this as I make my lineups, as I crunch and recrunch, and I'm not getting quite to where I want to get with my exposures. I might go and reduce my randomness so that I have a little bit more control, but I think 50% is a good starting place for NFL Showdown. All right, guys, let me take a little break here to tell you about our sponsor, Noos Advantage. Notice Advantage is bringing you the most dynamic fantasy sports platform available today. Play in pick'em contests versus other people for a shot at winning $150,000 plus in cash. Download the app, choose a contest, select your player props, and climb the leaderboard when you make correct picks. Test your skills versus the house and 20x your entry if you hit all of your picks. Bet up to 5 player prop over unders or individual player matchups across every major sports league, including NFL, MLB, NBA, PGA, MMA, and NASCAR. Sign up now with promo code Stokastic. That's STOKASTIC, all caps, at noasadvantage.com or download the app in the App Store to get a first match deposit bonus of up to $25. Be sure to also check out our NFL lineup generator for Noah's Advantage, which you can find in the video description below. Daily fantasy sports has been refined with No House Advantage. Check it out now. I'm hearing that there is going to be some overlay tonight. At least we're looking at some overlay. Maybe it'll decrease before lock. But if you have some time, I'd go check it out right now because we're looking at potential overlay tonight to take advantage of. Minimum projection included in calculation. Again, I'm trying to get unique. So it's set at 3 right now. I want to allow players who score or who are projected for fewer than 3 fantasy points to potentially get into my lineups. One way to do this is just to go in and give those players boost to their projection, raise their projections up to 3 fantasy points. Another way to do this is to reduce this. I might end up doing both. I'm going to reduce this to 2 for now. The thumbs up down adjustment, I don't really use the thumbs up, but I would recommend that newer players use the thumbs up and down rather than adjusting projections. The projections at Stokastic are the best in the industry. You're going to want to rely on those projections pretty heavily. So I'd recommend using this. And I think 8% is a good starting point, but this just gives you the flexibility to adjust it if you want to. All right, I think that that should do it for the general tab. I will leave this at 4 players max from each team. I don't want to force the 3-2 or 2-3 constructions. I'll just leave it at 4, which is the max that you can get to. These tabs up here for NFL Showdown, I don't use the projections tab. Don't do anything there. Don't use the position stacks tab. Don't use the team stacks tab. The only other tab I use here is the groups tab, and I will create a new group. And for example, I'll set up a Josh Allen MVP group so I'm going to set this as the key player. So every lineup in this group is going to have Josh Allen at MVP. And the players that I'm going to add to this group are Bills receivers. So I'm going to go down and I'm going to find every Bills receiver who has a projection. I'm just looking at these, the teams here, the projections here, and I'm just going down the list. So starting with wide receivers, adding Diggs, Crowder, McKenzie, Davis, Shakir, Knox, Tommy Sweeney. Currently not going to be getting into my lineups at 0.56 fantasy points because I have my minimum set at 2. I might give him a little boost. Haven't decided yet. He might be a player I'll look into a little bit later. And I think for the purposes of this group, I'm not going to be including running backs. You could include them if you think that these running backs have a high potential of scoring points through the air, scoring a passing touchdown. You could include them in this group because that would be obviously positively correlated with Josh Allen. But because I am only going to include one player from this group, I'm only going to require one player from this group. I'm fine with leaving it at just wide receivers and tight ends as coming into every lineup where I have Josh Allen MVP. I want at least one of these players in that lineup. Another thing that I'll do is if I have Josh Allen MVP, I want to actually increase the probability that I get more of these receivers in my lineups. And I'll do that by going over here and giving them little boosts. And I'll be adjusting over time exactly how much this is. But generally, I'm going to be giving higher boosts to players with lower projections because fewer people are typically going to be playing them. But if they score, it's going to be a big boon for Josh Allen. They also need the boost more because they're not going to get into that many lineups if you have a projection of 2.08, for example. All right, so just giving little boosts here. And again, this is just discretionary. These numbers are not, there's no science involved here. This is just art. I might go back and adjust after I look at my lineups, but I'll just use this as a starting point. All right, so this is my Josh Allen MVP group. Next, I'll set up a Matthew Stafford MVP group. Now, Matthew Stafford is going to be a similar process. Set that as my key player. Go through and add Rams receivers. And in this case, because for Matthew Stafford, I'm going to set it to 2 to require at least 2 pass catching options. I'm also going to include Rams running backs in the group. Because if they score a touchdown through the air, that's also going to benefit Stafford. And I'm still going to have at least 2. So I want to see Stafford putting up points elsewhere as well. So I'm going to change this down here to if any key player are used. So in this case, it's Stafford, at least 2 players from this group. And because I'm doing 2, I want it to be a little bit of a wider group and include those running backs as well. And I'll do the same thing I did with Josh Allen, give a little boost here. Smaller boost for the guys who are going to be in a lot of lineups anyway, and then the guys that are less likely to get into lineups naturally, but I want for the purpose of being unique, and because they have some opportunity, I'm going to give them a little bit bigger boost. And again, McCutcheon currently not in my player pool. I'll probably give him a little bit of a boost because he might have an opportunity tonight. We don't really know what to expect from this Rams receiving core with Van Jefferson out. Some of these guys, the Atwells, Skowroneks, McCutcheons of the world, they could benefit. Bryson Hopkins actually is in that group as well. We don't know what they're going to do exactly, so I will probably give him a little bit of a boost to at least have a possibility of getting him into some lineups. The running backs, I'm giving smaller boosts to. I'd rather have receivers in there if I have Stafford at captain, but I'm including them in the group because I want the possibility of just having a running back and one other wide receiver in my Stafford captain lineups, but I'm giving them smaller boosts than I give to the receivers. All right. And now I'm debating because there's only 5 players in your lineup on FanDuel. Do you need to have 2 in this group is something that I am considering right now. I think I'm going to leave it for now, but that is something to think about because you can only have 5 players in your lineup, and receivers don't get quite the same boost that they get on DraftKings relative to the quarterback. It's only half point PPR. They also don't get bonuses for like 100 yards like they do on DraftKings. So you could consider doing just one. It just would be difficult for Stafford to get there, I think, as the captain or as the MVP, I should say. Uh, it would be difficult for Stafford to put up enough fantasy points to be the MVP, even on FanDuel, without bringing a couple of these guys along, just because he doesn't really do much on the ground like Josh Allen does. Josh Allen, it wouldn't be surprising at all to see him, rush for 50 yards and a touchdown. So he does enough on the ground to put up fantasy points. Stafford doesn't rush for touchdowns, and the Rams also don't do a ton of like trick plays where he could theoretically throw it to players who are not in the FanDuel pool. But if you think that that's a possibility that maybe they'll score some other way without involving these options, then you might want to, keep this at only one player. Something to think about. I think for now I'm going to leave it at 2, but it's something that I will think about adjusting later. All right, one more group that I will probably set is Matthew Stafford. If he is in the flex spot, I probably still want a receiver somewhere else, a Rams receiver somewhere else in the lineup because it's so unlikely that Stafford is going to put up enough fantasy points to be in the optimal without bringing a receiver along with him. He is also. Let me see what Cooper Kupp's price tag is. I'm questioning myself a little bit here whether I want to set this group. Again, this is a process that changes every single slate for me. So if Stafford is 15.5, Cooper Kupp is 1,600. Yeah, so I think that if I have Stafford Uh, in the flex spot, I probably want at least one other Rams receiver. I might just give a boost here. I might not require it. So I'll show you what my process is here. I'm going to go through, add in all of the Rams receivers. I've actually seen Alex Baker. I don't know if he won a tournament, but he was very live, very late with a quarterback who was not a rushing quarterback in the flex spot without any other receivers from that team in his lineup. So it can happen sometimes, even with these non-rushing quarterbacks. But I think I'm just going to set a very broad group. And I might just give little boosts instead of actually requiring that these players be in the lineup with Stafford at flex. And because there's no position multiplier, it's pretty unlikely that I'm going to have lineups with like Tutu Atwell, Ben Skowronek in the MVP spot. I'm still going through and just adding them just in case, but this is probably less important than it is on DraftKings, where there's actually a salary multiplier to go along with the points multiplier in the captain spot. All right, so if I have Matthew Stafford in the flex spot, most likely there's going to be another receiver from the Rams somewhere in the lineup with him. So I'm just going to give small boost to all these players. You could consider just going if any key players used, so that'd be Stafford in the flex. If any key players used, then use at least one player from this entire group, because the most likely scenario is if Stafford is in the flex spot, one of these players comes along with him, but not necessarily the case given that only one player, you only need one player per team to come in. It is at least feasible that Stafford could be the highest scorer on the Rams without bringing somebody else in. I'm just going to set this at 4 per player for now. Again, no science to this. I will potentially go back and adjust these numbers after looking at my lineups. I just like to set something here as a beginning point to adjust from. All right, so this is after the utility spot. With Josh Allen, I don't think it's necessary to set this group at all because he does so much with his legs. He could theoretically just be the highest scoring Bills player on the ground by rushing for many yards, scoring rushing touchdowns. He doesn't necessarily need to bring Bills receivers along for the ride with him. So I think with Josh Allen, I'm not going to set that group. Another group that you could consider setting is a group with all of the receivers from a team at MVP. And then what you do is I'm not gonna go through and do every player here. I'm just gonna kind of give you an idea of what I do. So I go down and add the Rams receivers in the MVP spot as key players. So in this case, in all these other groups, I just have one player as my key player. In this case, every Rams receiver in the MVP spot would be in this group. So Cooper Kupp, Allen Robinson, Tyler Higbee, et cetera, et cetera. You add all of the Rams receivers in the MVP spot to the group as key players, and then you can add Stafford at flex. And rather than requiring Stafford to be in the lineup, because really these players can be the MVP without Stafford coming along, because Stafford does score fewer fantasy points than his receivers on every passing play. I'm not going to require it. I'm going to say only apply plus minus adjustments. And after adding this entire group, I'm just going to give Stafford a boost when those guys are in the MVP spot, because certainly there is positive correlation. If a receiver is scoring enough fantasy points to be in the MVP spot, most likely he's going to be bringing the quarterback along with him. And there are a number of other groups that you can consider. I usually only keep it to 5 or 6 groups in Fantasy Cruncher. You can go nuts with it if you want to include every little correlation that you know of for NFL DFS, but that is not something that I typically do. All right. I think that's pretty good so far for the settings. Just save it in the general tab, and then I'll go through and I will crunch for 50 lineups. There we go. At 150 lineups, you can see that I'm getting 55% Tyler Higbee in my lineups, 55% Josh Allen, 37% Matthew Stafford, so on and so forth. And I will then go through and I'll adjust. And I will adjust. In my case, I'm going to be adjusting projections. I would recommend for newer players, rather than actually adjusting these projections, because they are, again, the best in the industry, what I would rather do is give thumbs up or thumbs down to players you like or dislike. And you can do it up to 3 times. And because we have it set at 8%, currently you're getting an 8% boost to the player's projection per thumbs up you give. And that is what I would recommend doing to get those players. And for making that decision, the way I do it is I just look at the single game tool on Stokastic, and you can see I'm on the FanDuel tab here. You can see exactly how frequently in the Stokastic simulations a player shows up in the captain spot, and how often they show up in the utility spot, and how often they are owned in those spots. So in this case, we got Josh Allen. He's in the utility spot 44% of the time. He's in the captain spot 18% of the time. He's a little bit overrun. He's coming in at 23.6% ownership at captain. He's coming in at 52.2% in the flex spot. So he's over-owned in both spots. And you can see why, because he projects so well relative to his salary. I was getting a ton of Josh Allen. I'd like to get less. So I'm going to go in, and one way to do that is to give him thumbs downs. I will probably be adjusting his projection slightly. But then one other thing that I like to do is just here so I have it set at 100% exposure cap for every player universally. I do go into the MVP spot, and I'll typically set a cap here because I don't really usually want 100% of any one player in the captain spot. So I'll go in, and this changes slate to slate. I'll say that I want it at 20% on this slate. Just seems like a good number. I'll get at least 5 different players in the MVP spot on this slate. I'll usually have significantly more than that, but these are just the things that I do. After I've set everything up, I go in, I make adjustments until I get to exposure levels that I like. I know that I'm going to want a little bit less than 50%, significantly less than 50% Tyler Higbee in my lineups. So I'm going to just go and I'm going to adjust different players. I'm only getting 10% Tutu Atwell. As I mentioned before, I'm not going to get any Lance McCutcheon currently because he is not projected well enough to make it into my lineups at 1.1. So maybe I'll give him a little bit of a boost. See if I get him, if I get up to 3 fantasy points. I also added some projection to Khalil Shakir there. Generally, when I'm doing this, if I'm adjusting projections, I still want them to be kind of proportional to what the Stokastic projections are. So I might want to get more of some of these players, but like I'm typically not trying to jump players who are projected better unless ownership dictates. If like Tutu Atwell was getting 50% ownership and these guys were getting 5% ownership, maybe I'd want to jump Tutu Atwell, but oftentimes these are kind of the things I'm looking at, and I would probably keep those things in mind as you're giving thumbs up as well. But yeah, that's my process. I'll go in and sometimes I crunch 30, 40 times as I adjust, and I'm doing most of my adjustments just to the projections, but sometimes I'll go back into my advanced settings after I see my lineups if I don't like the way they look. This first lineup again. So first lineup I see Josh Allen is in the flex spot, no Bills receiver. Have to ask yourself, am I comfortable with that? I think that there's at least some chance that Josh Allen just puts up a massive number and doesn't bring any Bills receiver. So on this slate, I think I'm comfortable with it, but something to consider. If you're getting, 4 Rams pass catchers in a lineup and not getting Matthew Stafford in that lineup, maybe that's something that you want to consider changing. You just have to go back into your settings, kind of know what kinds of lineups you're looking for, and maybe adjust if it seems necessary. All right, seeing a Bills defense in my flex spot. First time I've seen that on FanDuel. Was not an option last year. All right, guys, that will do it for me. Remember to check out the Stokastic single game tool to kind of figure out how to adjust your player pool to the numbers that you like. And you can make some really nice lineups in Fantasy Cruncher. Thanks for watching. Good luck tonight.